Hey everybody, welcome to the Table Podcast. I am Nick Hand, and this is our very first opening release of the podcast. I'm joined by my brother Drew. Yep. You want like a podcast nickname or anything?
No, I don't think so.
Drew, and then we have Miggy Azalea. I think he's you know how every podcast has that guy? Like he's already that guy. You already have. You got the nickname. Yeah. Miggy Azalea.
Yeah.
I think it works.
Stick.
Probably wondering what we've been doing. Well, we've just been stacking our chips, getting ready. You know, you got to prepare for these kinds of things. And so we've been recording podcasts. For those of you wondering, what is the Table Podcast all about? Well, it's a long-form, anything goes podcast. Mm-hmm. So if you were to be on the field with your friends playing football and they're like, hey, what are the rules? You're like, I don't know, anything goes. That would be what the podcast is. It's kind of one of those anything goes type format. It's a long form format podcast. We do have goals though, and I do want to address those. We'll always maybe open up with some just little fun before we get into, you know, as people say in the church world, the meat of the matter. You know, we don't want milk, we want meat.
Right?
Isn't it weird the things that church people say?
Just some meat, you know.
You know, that was a lot of milk, but it wasn't enough meat. Mm-hmm. Like seriously,
why milk and meat though?
I don't. Well, because it's rooted in theological
baby
expression.
Food.
Yeah,
that's why.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah. Could you imagine? Yeah,
it's like a well-balanced diet.
Well, it is, but how can there's not like vegetarians, like, you know what I mean? They always want the meat. Like what? It's just it just makes no sense. Anyway, we do have goals though, and. The ultimate goal of the Table Podcast, I would say, is to get people to think about what they don't think about. Over 90% of what we, in the way that our minds work, only 10% is conscious. 90% is either unconscious or subconscious. And so the goal is to kind of get through conversation to bring people to a place where they can consider different ideas and things that maybe they don't normally think about or consider. One thing that I find in our world is just how much our thoughts and our ideals and belief systems, whether it be as it pertains to people groups or social groups, politics, we just regurgitate so much information. I think a lot of that comes from being in the media age where we read something and we think that it's true when it might be fake news. You don't know if it could be fake news. Right. And the whole thing is to get you to think about what you think about or what you believe. You know, we say that we believe a lot of things, but I think it's important to evaluate those things. And conversation is the ultimate format for that, because it's impossible to hate someone whose story you know. And when you hear where somebody comes from, I think you realize just how much we're all passionate about like our way of thinking. But we realize just how much we actually have in common. We have so much more in common than we actually do that divides us. Yeah. And I think that's the tragedy of American society, is because we allow things to divide us that really shouldn't. I think that we can disagree. We can see things from the opposite sides of the world or the table, so to speak, and at the same time still see that we have more in common that unites us as brothers and sisters than we do that divides us. So that's what the podcast is about. We're taking the rails off this one, so don't put us in a box. We'll kind of figure it out as we go. It's going to be a whole lot of fun, and buckle up for the ride. We'll always try to start out with something like this to prime the pump. There's another phrase that is just like, let's just prime the pump a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, it's something that has to be done. You got to prime it.
Yeah. Wet the whistle.
You got to wet the whistle. Hey, one thing, speaking of whistle, that I've learned on this podcast so far, I think I need to go to like one of those people that like pull your nose hairs out.
Dude, no.
Because I listen to myself and I got like a constant like, shh. Like
right
you
now
probably
you
hear it. Well, yeah, listen. Do you hear that in there? That should not be there.
Maybe just a simple neti pot before.
No, I just like slick them down.
Just slick them down.
That's so disgusting.
What
is it that makes nose hairs extra disgusting?
It is gross. Because I was gonna bring it up earlier. I had to take out my nose ring just to like get in there with the trimmer, you know?
Oh, nose. Okay, nose hairs are arguably the most disgusting hair, and I don't know why that is.
I think what grosses me out is like, you maintain, but then every once in a while you'll find one that's been hiding in a crevice and it's
God.
like a long
See
sucker,
that?
and you pull that guy out.
Now that just caused us to lose listeners. Like we haven't even
just
got this
lost
party
so
started.
many.
Hey, our guest on the podcast today is the legendary Robert Madu. You've probably heard of him if you are in the know on what is cool and what is not. He's been a traveling communicator preacher for over 10 years and has spoken at some of the greatest conferences and spaces in the world. Him and his wife, Taylor, have 3 kids. And the only thing I don't like about him is that he's a huge Cowboys fan. Cowboys rest in peace this season. You know, he talked about some football stuff in this podcast, but it's extremely enlightening conversation. I hope that you enjoy it. And even as we do these podcasts, we're going to start out with some pretty awesome preachers and communicators, because that's the world that I'm in a lot of the time. But we will be beyond those 4 walls of conversation. So, ladies and gentlemen, Robert Madu.
First the barricade, now the table.
Hey, let's start out. How did talking about like preaching and stuff like that? How did you get into this? Some people would call it a line of work. Yeah. I mean, we wouldn't call it a line of work, but for you, like, how did it start for you?
It's actually a really interesting story, and ended up being an integral part of why I'm doing it now. So, I growing up did not want to be a preacher. I grew up in church doing drama and plays and acting. So I actually wanted to be an actor. I was like the guy that was always saying, how come Hollywood and Christians in Hollywood rather make the cheesiest, worst movies? I was like, I'm going to change it, Lord. We're going to make good movies, and it's going to bring glory to God. And so I always thought I was going to be an actor. But the denomination of which I'm a part of, Assemblies of God, has this thing called Fine Arts Competition. Mm-hmm. And it's like, to just give some context, it's like Christian American Idol on steroids.
Yeah.
So you actually compete, believe it or not, in drama, in singing. They have a worship category. They have a preaching category. They have, you name it, anything you can probably do in ministry. They have a category for it in which you compete. And the reason they do it is because they want to help young people discover, develop, and deploy their gifts for the kingdom of God. So I always did the drama categories. So we're talking about human video solos.
What is a human video?
A human video solo.
For those that don't know.
Yes, this is literally, really letting you know how much of a church kid I was. So you physically act out and perform whatever the song was. So back in my day it could be any song, but back in my day, Carmen would have been a huge song. Yes, because it's like these narratives that he's telling today. And for people
Satan
who are
Bite the Dust, was that what you did?
Yes, Satan Bite the Dust, all of those. I did human videos to that. And if you're listening to this podcast, you're like, what it is? Just think R. Kelly trapped in the closet. So like narrative.
Right.
So you do acting and stuff to that. And so I always did the drama category. And my junior year of doing it, it's from junior high to high school, my youth pastor came up to me and he said, Robert, I really feel like you've got a gift to communicate the gospel. I want you to do the preaching category. I was like, why? I was like, I'm going to Hollywood to be an actor. He's like, just do it for me. So I went home and got a text of scripture and just wrote down a little rinky-dink message, what I thought, and I went and preached it to him. And I finish, and tears are coming down his face. Wow. And he's like, you have no idea the gift that God has given you. I'm like, what is wrong with you? And so I go do the competition. You preach a 5-minute sermon in front of 3 judges. And when I tell you 2 minutes into doing the short sermon, as they call it, it was like the Holy Spirit hit the room. Wow. And I heard God's voice so strong that I almost felt like it was audible, saying, hey, this is more than a competition. This is what I've called you to do for the rest of your life. And I remember the moment like it was yesterday. Ended up winning that competition. And if you win in that competition, you actually get a scholarship to Assemblies of God Bible College. So at the time, I was wanting to go to SMU and do acting, but didn't get the scholarship there. Got this full scholarship to Bible college. So God was like, let me make my will clear for you. You can go pay $30,000 a year, or you can go for free $99 to this Bible college. And so I was like, you know what? Yeah. And so that's how I got started, man. It's interesting even looking back. I was always drawn to preaching. Growing up in Dallas, Bishop Jakes was a huge voice and influence. But that was the moment where I was like, okay, this is what I'm called to do for the rest of my life.
Wow. Kind of just began like that. For you, how is that? what is it like competing in preaching? I mean, that's right, like talent show.
Yeah,
basically,
yeah.
that's kind of like an interesting thing.
Absolutely.
Like, let's see who's more anointed.
Right.
What is that even like?
Right. It's funny too, and like it can get kind of crazy, but the heart of it is to really help you steward and find what your gift is. So they judge you on your content, on your delivery, but to be honest, because that was the entry point into my call to preach, if I'm not careful, even today, it's a fight. For the fight of my life is to realize that when I get up to preach, I'm not preaching for the approval of other people. I'm not preaching to get a scorecard from somebody else. I'm preaching because this is a call in my life, because the gospel is good news and people need to hear it. So, but it's kind of a weird thing, and it can get crazy in that competition for it. You see churches, just about to have a fight it's actually going on now in Houston, Texas, the national competition for it.
Yeah.
But the purpose of it is to really just help you find out what is on the inside of you. What is God giving you?
Yeah.
That you're
How do you
supposed to use.
draw that line? People in ministry, there's an emphasis on, you're gifted to do what you do. In any other industry, I think it seems to be more about skill, and so there is a great sense of competition in a lot of ways.
Right.
If you're a soda company, you compete with other soda companies.
Yeah.
In church work, like the whole thing, right, is no one's in competition with anybody.
Right.
At the same time, you have a skill set and a craft, especially you coming out of your background. How do you tote that line? How do you I want to be better at what I do, but at the same time, looking at other people and not giving into the trap.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think one of the messages that's almost become a life message that I preach is this message about comparison. I call it On Their Mark. And it's really a message that comes against anybody who has the spirit of comparison, comparing yourself to other people. Paul is clear that comparing yourself to other people, you're not wise, in Corinthians and that whole thing. But the part I probably don't say in the message that I should is that there is actually a level of comparison that is healthy, that is so good. How else can you know if you're good until you look at somebody else? I think one of the things that's changed even in the sports world with kids, which mine aren't old enough yet to compete, but I'm going to find them a sport that they compete in where they actually still give kids first, second, third place, because now they don't want to hurt kids' feelings, so everybody's a winner. Everybody gets a granola bar. Yeah. I'm like, heck no, my kids are going to know who's first, second, and third, because they don't want to hurt people's feelings. So to me, there is a level of comparison that is extremely helpful, that can help you grow. But to me, the line for where it becomes unhealthy is to the point that I feel like my purpose is thwarted or negated because you are better than me, to the point I say, well, forget it. Right. That's when, to me, it's become unhealthy. Yeah. But I think it would be absolutely crazy for somebody who does any craft in anything to not look at somebody else who's doing it and say, how can I grow? One of the things that's helped me as a preacher is listening to preachers like crazy. I tell young preachers, if you want to grow, listen to preachers, not to be them, but to learn, hey, I can be better. I can be clearer. Look at how he executed that illustration. I can be better at that. Because if you don't do that, you won't grow. So to me, there's a level of comparison that is super healthy for you to grow your gift.
It's important to talk about. Not a lot of people talk about, that side, I think, of the coin.
Yeah. And
especially in a world of society, you talk about your kids in the sports analogy, right? Like that's something that more and more people aren't comfortable with teaching their kids the struggle.
Right. Yeah.
And the power, I think, of navigating through struggle. I know me and my wife were just talking about this last night. For you, how important do you think that is to I guess to get, because it's one thing you see. Do you see that in our world and the generations to come, where there's almost a hesitancy to acknowledge the necessity of, call it struggle, call it pain, call it, the process.
Right.
For the sake of achieving, whether it be your dreams or your goals or just getting through life.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. I think it's huge. And it's weird too. It's so funny you say that, because literally this morning, early morning on our little back patio, we have this little roller coaster ride that my 2-year-old and 3-year-old love. It's like just on this hill in our backyard, and they'll go down it. And a lot of times they'll try to pull it back up to get it back on the roller coaster, and like they'll be struggling. And so I'll be quick to go over there and just help them do it. And they're 2 and 3. I'm like,
Yeah.
you know what? They can lift this
Yeah.
thing themselves. But
Yeah.
but it's my heart is just out of love
Yeah.
to help them out. And I think you have to really be careful because you can actually end up hindering somebody if you don't do that. But you need to allow people to go through a struggle to fail. To speak back to that competition I did before I even went into acting, I did the singing category and did terrible. Absolutely terrible. Sang a solo and did the song, and it was just bad. My nerves got the best of me, and I was like short breath, and it sounded terrible. But in that, it pushed me into acting, from the acting category into preaching. I think you got to sometimes even fail and stumble your way into your purpose. I often say, to use a biblical illustration, I think one of the greatest things that happened for David was when Saul made him put on his armor to fight Goliath. Because as soon as he put on that armor, he realized, this is not me. Yeah. And I think that's healthy. That's good for you to say, you know what? I tried this. This is not me. And I felt miserable. Let me go back to what I know. I am a slingshot fighter. I am not an armor person. But to not give somebody that opportunity to try something out or to fail, I think it robs them of the ability to find out what God put on the inside of them, because it's in the struggle of it. It's like working out. It's in the struggle and the tearing down of the muscles that you say, okay, now I know what I'm graced and called to do.
Yeah. It's funny because I think in today's day and age, that is part of the equation that gets left out a lot. Like nobody likes to hear that.
Right. Yeah.
I think even for me growing up within the context of the church, people talk about the struggle or the mountains and the valleys, and you think, okay, but not me. I don't. For me, it's going to be different.
Absolutely.
Like mountaintop to mountaintop for me. But the importance of embracing that for you. Do you think that sometimes too? I look at it seems like generations that have it really hard, they try to make it easier for their kids, and a lot of times those kids that never learn the power of being able to push through resistance, they seem to struggle.
No, absolutely. Yeah,
and it's something you kind of see
100%, because it's like there's something that is produced out of the struggle that you can't get when everything is easy. And so, but to that end too, also, I think that no matter what, your struggle is going to be something. I think there's some people of the older generation who are like, I had to walk 6 miles in the snow both ways. And it's like, okay, they didn't have Teslas when you were growing up either. So there's different struggles that we're going to have. So everybody's going to have some type of struggle. And I would even say to somebody who maybe has been in an atmosphere that they've kind of been coddled and not been given that, sometimes you just got to do something that you hate.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I think this notion that everything God calls you to do is going to be easy, that you're going to like it. Yeah. I think that is just something that you're going to be happy about it. I think that is a false narrative. There's just going to be some stuff that you're absolutely going to hate. In fact, I don't know, can we say this on this podcast?
You can say anything on this podcast.
Hello, anything.
Go for it.
No, but there's a guy on, I was just seeing on Instagram the other day, and he is a trainer. And he has this whole little thing. He says, do what sucks today. Yeah. And that's his thing. It's like, do something in terms of working out that sucks, something you do not want to do, but in the long run, it's going to be good for you. And I think sometimes we need to take that in life. Do something that sucks, that you do not want to do, but in the end, it's going to help you grow into who God's called you to be.
What's interesting, you talk about that. I've been thinking a lot about the idea of discipline, right? Discipline, one of the definitions that I've heard a lot is doing what you don't want to do when you don't want to do it, so that you can do what you want to do when you want to do it.
Absolutely.
This idea of going through, really preparation, but the thing about discipline is you don't always know why.
Right.
What it's going to lead to.
Exactly.
But having those regimented things, it's like, you bring up the David thing. It's like, whether it be the slingshot or the harp, I don't, that he ever knew what was going to be the thing that's going to make him the man. Exactly. But having the disciplines in both are what created a space for him to one day be able to be called before Saul, or to be able to be called on to kill a giant, and he's ready and prepared.
So true.
This idea of preparing for it, discipline.
Yeah. No, I love that, because that word used to scare the mess out of me. Like discipline, it's like, oh, what do I need to do? But what? Something that changed the framework for me is that if you know what your passion is, your passion will always point you to the discipline. And so I think a lot of times if you think discipline is separate, you're like, oh, I can't do that. But people are never going to be disciplined about something that they're not necessarily passionate about. put it in my context, I love communicating the word of God. I am passionate about it. I hate reading. I hate reading commentaries and sitting in a library for hours upon hours and reading stuff I don't understand. I can't stand that. I hate getting up early and getting away. I would rather be just Netflix and,
chill?
And chill. Hello. With my wife. I would much rather do that. But my passion to effectively communicate the gospel so that people would see the beauty and the splendor of who Jesus is, that passion produces the discipline for me to put in the 18 to 17 hours I put in each message that I preach. So I think sometimes, to me, reframing that whole discipline thing and going, okay, what is my passion? What is something that I want? And then what is the discipline that is necessary for that passion to come forth? And if you can do it like that, it's still got to do the hard work. But for me to have the passion and the framework of the overarching thing that I want, the end result, I think it helps you with the discipline.
For you and what you do, extremely dynamic, gifted speaker. I mean, people strive to have half of the gift, the talent, to be able to do what you do. For you, what percentage of that is gift? What percentage of that is work?
Oh my goodness! See that? I think the lines just get blurred because, and to be quite transparent, I think in my earlier days of starting to preach, I probably put in more grind than I do now. And there's even a voice on the inside of me saying, "Robert, get back to the grind that you used to have." Because when I first started preaching, man, I'm telling you, it was like 30 to 40 hours, honestly, in a message. I would write out every word of the message, every I still listen to a lot of communicators today, but when I listen to communicators, I just started off from this healthy premise of any person that is communicating is teaching you something. No matter what they're doing, they're teaching you what to do or what not to do. So I would be such a student of that, just writing down on a sheet of paper. I would draw a line down one sheet of paper. This is what I learned from this person that was good. This is what I learned that is not me, or definitely I didn't think was effective. So I think, I don't even think I could put a percentage on it because the lines get blurred. Because I'm so
for you, how can you talk about getting back to the grind? You'd probably look back and hopefully, like when you look back on your career or whatever you call it, you look at how far that you've come. In a lot of ways, I mean, everybody progresses and gets better. Would you want to, when you talk about getting back to the grind, what even leads you or motivates you to get back to that if you look at what you're doing now and it seems to be working? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's just,
what drives you to say, I need to get back to the grind?
The drive to not be complacent. I just think complacency.
Comfortable?
Yes, comfortable. I don't want to ever feel like I've arrived, that I've got it. Because part of the grind at the beginning was, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to preach. I don't know how to write a sermon. And so part of the grind is just you not knowing. But after a while, as you grow, you're like, oh, okay, I know how to do it. But just getting back to that vulnerability of, God, help me. I don't know what I'm doing. And sometimes that's even, for me, in the context of what I do, it's even style. Yeah. I've even challenged myself sometimes, say, can I just sit on a stool and not have to, because my tendency is generally to preach and shout and get crazy. But I was like, hey, can I still be comfortable in my gift to just sit back and just have a teaching moment? Just finding ways to get back to that, uncomfortability of, Lord, I don't know what I'm doing, and if you don't help me do it, this is going to be a train wreck.
How important is that? Because we were even talking earlier about this idea of staying hungry, going after it, not becoming entitled.
Yeah.
And you're right. I think for anybody, when you get a little bit of success under your belt, there is a tendency to get comfortable.
Absolutely.
How do you fight that? How important is that?
I think sometimes just being aware of it is the biggest thing, because I think sometimes complacency is like, I heard this one quote the other day, man. It said the chains of habit are too light to be felt until they're too heavy to be moved.
Wow. Okay, say that again. Say it again.
The chains of habit are too light to be felt until they're too heavy to be moved. And so sometimes complacency is something that'll creep in you and it'll lull you to sleep.
You don't even know.
And you don't even know it. That's what's crazy about sleep. If you really think about it, you don't know when you're sleeping. If anybody ever just dozed off, sometimes you don't even know you're sleeping. Somebody say, hey, wake up. You're like, oh, I didn't even know. So to me, that's what complacency is. You don't even realize it. And I think God, in his care for us, he'll give you moments where it'll wake you up and he'll push you. So that's what I really lean on. Besides working from a place of saying, God, don't ever let me get that place. I think God in his care for us will push you into a place. Some people are so frustrated in the job right now. It's because they've been comfortable, and God's been trying to get you out of that job because you're supposed to be a CEO. You're supposed to be running your own business. The reason you wake up and hate your job every day is because you're supposed to be the owner of the company, And so sometimes God in his sovereignty won't even allow you to get complacent, and you can just be frustrated or wake up and go, oh, wait a minute, I've gotten stuck in the system, and then I need to go.
Which is interesting because, probably for a lot of people, comfort is the goal, right? Let me achieve so that I can get to a place where I can relax.
Yeah.
And while it's the goal, it's also, in a lot of ways, your ultimate enemy.
Absolutely, 100%. If you look at anybody who's achieved any type of greatness, no matter the field, to me, I love watching documentaries of people like that. And to me, the underlining factor is that person never lost their hunger. Kobe's still shooting 1,000 shots a day, even after he's gotten MVP and won the game. It's just not losing that hunger to be better.
So say again, you keep your hunger by just being, you said, an awareness. How do you keep that?
I think an awareness that I don't ever want to get complacent.
Yeah.
And I think God in his grace has given me some, hey, wake up, you're getting comfortable.
Right.
Moments. He'll do that.
Yeah.
So
For you in the field of work that you're in, what do you think is one of the areas that people most misunderstand about what you do? There's a lot of communicators, I think, especially in the church world, pastors, preachers, easily misunderstood, put in a box.
Yeah. I think it's doing it for the applause of man and the approval of other people. Again, it's one of the verses I always just go back to. It's just looking at Jesus, right? Who's our template, who's our model. I just think the power of that opening moment when he's being baptized and it comes from the Father. And he says, this is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased.
Yeah.
I just think you have to have that approval from heaven in going into your divine call. That was the opening thing before Jesus ever did a miracle, before he went to the cross. I think God knew, what Jesus was going to go through, and he had to hold on to that approval for his Father. And I think sometimes, even today, like we're preaching for amens, and I know I'll speak for myself. Sometimes when I'm preaching, if I don't get the response I'm wanting, I'm like, oh man, they were quiet. They didn't like it, not knowing that, man, the apostles and the people before us, their reward was to be stoned. Their reward was to get imprisoned and to be whipped and beaten. And so I think so many times if you're not careful, you can go into it. Because again, you want to care for people and you want to minister to people, which that's got to be a huge factor. If you care about preaching more than you care about people, you're never going to be an effective communicator. But I think just getting back to where does my approval, where does my validation come from? And I think a lot of people miss that. They think I'm doing this, also people will like me. Also, they'll walk away from the service and go, oh, that was the most amazing thing I've ever heard, as opposed to walking away going, man, what an amazing Savior that we have. And I think if you ever get that out of whack, you're not going to be effective.
Right. For you, one of the things that you do in preaching is obviously you're communicating to a group of people that there's a lot of them in the room that may not think like you. And, a lot of the things that you're putting out, people that are far from God, trying to, as a preacher would, trying to get them to see their need for God. How do you approach that table?
Yeah. This is what I love, though. I think sometimes for a season, I would think I would always have to come across that type of person, and that my apologetics had to be strong and sound, and I think they do. But I think if you really think about it, we have an advantage because I think in every human there is a God-sized hole. There is this void that has to be filled, and so when helping that really changed the course of preaching for me, realizing that I already have an advantage, because no matter how somebody wants to front and pretend, there's something on the inside of them that wants something more than what they're living out right now. So operating from that premise has helped me a lot. I think when you're preaching and when you're speaking, putting your feet in the shoes of the listener
Yeah.
is huge. Almost, if I can say this, maybe even more sometimes than the text. Because I think if you're not careful, and I can lean towards this, there's a lot of preachers and speakers who've gotten so good at speaking to Christians,
Yeah.
and they speak Christianese,
Right.
that they don't even know how to speak to humanity. And if you can learn, somebody told me this that I'll never forget, a preacher that I so revere, and he said, Robert, learn how to speak to humanity. If you learn how to speak to humanity, not just Christians, you'll always have an audience. You look at people who aren't believers, Tony Robbins, who people are paying a whole lot of money to hear this man speak, and Oprah is maybe people want to, and even church, you want to castigate her, but if you look, she's learned how to speak to humanity. And so for me, it's very helpful to have relationships, to have people in my life that are broken, that are in a journey who don't think like I think, and me putting my feet in their shoes and feeling what humanity feels. So then when I approach a text, I'm not looking at it through the lens of just a believer. I'm looking at it through the lens of somebody who doesn't believe it or who's walking through some pain. How is this going to speak to them? So I think always being mindful of who my audience is and listening and thinking when I'm writing a message, not how is this going to sound to me, how's it going to sound to their ears after I speak it.
You know, when you talk about that, putting yourself in someone else's shoes, it seems like that lesson, you know, even transcends that of, you know, speaking and things like that, preaching. It's kind of like a lost art of humanity. Absolutely. It's one thing we're not good at is empathy, understanding a person's journey. We get on the bandwagon of just wanting to be right. How important do you think that whole idea is? And for you, if that's something that you do every time that you prepare a message or you're preparing something to share with a group of people, you know, if there's anything that we can do to better understand each other as the human race, even outside the context of faith and religion and pursuit of all things that are, you know, that come from a place of conviction, how do you do that? And what would be maybe some, I don't know, guides that you would say we could use as a society to be better at that?
Yeah, I think humility is one. I think we live in a culture where everybody's so prideful. You know, social media and all that is funny because it gives everybody a platform. So everybody's prideful. Everybody has their own audience. Everybody is so quick to say what they want to say. Yeah. People aren't even listening to other people. They're actually waiting to talk. Yeah. And so for me, it starts with a place of humility, realizing that I do not know it all, that I am flawed, that I am still in process too. I think humility is huge. I think hanging out with people that are different than you. You have to be intentional about finding people who do not think like you think, who do not process like you process. If you're the smartest person in your circle, or if everybody in your circle says, ooh, that's good when you say something, you got the wrong circle. You need some people that challenge you, and it's uncomfortable, but you need to find some people that are totally different than you and be intentional about those relationships. I love the relationships of people that I meet who do not think like I think. And you have to fight for it, especially what I do, because I'm always in churches all the time. So me and my wife, we are so intentional. She's better at it than I am, of just pulling people in our life who, whether it be like somebody I can agree on fashion, you know, like we love to shop. And so we found that there's been so many relationships that we have with people that we go, you know, to a store and they work there and they see us all the time and they're shopping. And yeah, maybe one day they will come to a service, but we just love the relationship that we have. We're just talking to them when we go and they're talking about fashion, but they wouldn't believe anything that I believe. So I think humility and just being intentional about your relationships and making sure that there's people that don't think like you is huge.
It's funny because I don't know if it's human nature or what, but there is a tendency. There's most times in conversation agenda behind our words.
Absolutely.
You know, so especially with, I think, man, again, our context in a lot of ways is church. I think it's one area that the church has to do a heck of a lot better in. Right. This idea of being willing to go on a journey with people, to have conversation without the goal of me getting to my point.
Right, yeah,
So
exactly.
you see things the way that I see them. Most people don't think to have a conversation with somebody about fashion to understand where they're coming from and just end it there. That's part of the big picture and the big plan too.
Exactly. And I think it goes back to me to the humility thing. Because I think some of us, when we have those conversations and our end goal is like, okay, I gotta get them saved. That's the end goal. I think in many ways it's a pride that we think that we are the power and not the gospel. Paul says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power. Just the good news in and of itself. And it's so funny, like growing up, talking to church people, like, I had a conversation with somebody, my son was like, did you lead him in the prayer?
Right.
Like, that's the end goal so many times. And I'm like,
right. Or your conversation was less than if you didn't.
If you didn't. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And it's like, oh, well, there you go.
Didn't count.
Yep,
Good for
didn't count.
nothing.
Now that person will never have an encounter.
Right.
That was your moment to draw the hook. And I just think our God is bigger than that.
Yeah.
I think just engaging people in conversation. I mean, look at Jesus. He's fully God. He's fully man. I just love, one of my favorite encounters is how he encounters the woman at the well and just begins conversation, say, hey, will you give me a drink? Just engages her on the level of, hey, will you give me a drink? And now we're going to get to the prophetic. Hey, I know you have 5 husbands and the one you're with now, but he didn't come out the gate with that. He just took time to sit and talk to her. And I think, if we can get back to that, it'll be huge.
I think a person that has extreme conviction about the things that you believe, how do you separate that from being able to, at the same time, while having conviction, being able to engage in authentic relationships with people that are different than you?
Yeah. I think it's knowing that while I have my convictions, it's not my job to convict. Mm-hmm. That's the Holy Spirit's job. It's my job just to love that person and let the Holy Spirit do its work. I always say you cannot clean a fish before you catch it. Yeah. Again, that kind of goes, I hate to use that illustration because it kind of goes back to the ideology of, I have a hook of something, but it's a reality that, hey, I'm not trying to convict you. I'm not trying to change you. I can't change anybody, but I can just love somebody where they're at and still hold on to my conviction, and to know that kindness is not an endorsement for somebody's lifestyle. I think sometimes, like, that's how crazy believers have got. We think that to be kind to somebody that is totally opposite of our belief system is to endorse what they're doing. And that's to me, that's when you get on the slippery slope and you get the psychos who are holding signs saying God hates the homosexual community, or God can't stand you because you had an abortion, or whatever the issue is. I think that's when you get on that slippery slope to think that, man, I can't be kind to somebody because my kindness is an endorsement of a lifestyle that I might not necessarily, that I don't agree with. So I think we can just get back to that, just being kind of like, it's nice to be nice is what my grandmama used to say, which is like an old little simple adage, but it's true.
Well, don't you ever think, I think about it too along the lines of, there's people that don't think like I do, but what's interesting about the human experience is there's people who have just as much conviction about the things that they think that they believe as I do about the things that I believe. Right. So to put myself in a place of superiority, I have to own my convictions, but my convictions are for me.
Absolutely.
I think that you're right. You get on a slippery slope when you try to become the convictor of other people, understanding that they're on their journey and God understands their journey greater than I ever could. Absolutely. Right? I think about my journey myself, the times in my life that I had convictions that maybe aren't even the same as they are today.
Yeah, absolutely. So true.
Isn't it interesting? Like, even your convictions change. The things that you're like 100% about today, you may think differently down the road. But isn't it interesting how much of the time we spend trying to police other people's convictions, or you should, behave differently or act differently or see things my way if you want to be right.
Exactly. Yeah. That's so true.
It's interesting to jump on that bandwagon. For you in preaching, especially because you are a person who speaks with conviction and has to follow the things that are obviously in your heart, I think that it's probably surprising to some, maybe even listening, that they're, because you're like, this is the way, right? But then you respect people's choice to choose a different way.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you deal with that, or maybe the criticism that you would get for that from people that would say, well, you're watering it down, or you're not practicing what you preach, or you're not, those are you've told us what your convictions are.
Exactly.
But you don't project those onto others. Seeing that, people who see that, because there's a lot of people that do.
Right. No, absolutely. Yeah.
How do you?
I always go to just the life of Jesus. If you look at how Jesus was, he was very different in how he approached his audience. To me, it goes always back to respect for who is my audience, who am I speaking to? Mm-hmm. Jesus talked to the Pharisees totally different than he talked to somebody who was an outcast or a sinner. And I think some people don't realize that there is an art to conversation with humanity. There's an art to it. Your message can be the same, but your method and how you talk to people is going to be totally different. If you were to tell me that I'm going to speak to your kids ministry tonight, there's going to be a total different way I'm going to approach the children than I'm going to approach the adults. I'm not watering down my message, but if I get up and I start trying to talk theology and eschatology I'm disrespecting those kids. So I think to me it's leaning on the Holy Spirit to know, what does this moment need, irrespective of what somebody who's trying to project what they think I should do or think that I'm deviating from my core message, is trusting the Holy Spirit to know, what does this moment need and what does this audience need? Because you can have the exact same message, but the way that the method in which you do it is totally different. I use the McDonald's, illustration. Like if you put in front of a kid a pot roast, a slice of bread, and some mashed potatoes, and a glass of Coca-Cola, he's not going to be excited about that at all. He's not going to jump up and down. But you take that same little pot roast, you make it a patty, you take that sliced bread, you make it sesame seed, you take the mashed potatoes, don't mash it, you cut them up and you fry them bad boys, you put it in a colorful box and you put a prize on the inside of a building with golden arches, 2 billion people served. And the content never changed. It's just the method and the way you presented it. It's the exact same concept. So to me, that's how I see the gospel and how our generation is realizing that, okay, we want to be as wise as a serpent, but as gentle as a dove. And I want to respect my audience enough to know, what does this particular audience mean? And I'm not downgrading my conviction just because I changed the method. Right.
So what does it mean for you to respect your audience?
It's to know where they're coming from, to know who they are, to know who's in the room. There's a saying in communication that if you ask an amateur speaker to speak, his first thought will be, what am I going to say? If you ask a professional, his first thought will be, who's my audience? And so that's just sitting where your audience sits, thinking about what your audience is thinking about. To me, that's respect and speaking to where they are, being relevant to where they are.
Yeah. For anybody who's, platform or audience increases, there's going to be increase of maybe criticism, haters, things like that. How do you navigate those waters?
The haters,
right?
It's so funny. I think we all do have haters, but I think sometimes this whole hater thing, it just trips me out, because I think sometimes it just gets too far to the point. Oh, they all hate.
Everybody's a hater.
No, everybody's a hater, and to me, it goes back to the humility thing. Anybody that has a different opinion than
they're
you, they're a hater.
Hater's gonna hate.
They don't think like I think. Yeah, they're a hater. No, they just have a different opinion. There's some people aren't hating on you. They're just jerks.
Is it that easy for you though? I mean, is it that easy for you when people, criticize? Is that?
Oh, no. It's still. Are there moments it affects me? Absolutely. That's part of the reason I have to have seasons where I just get off of social media, man, because it's amazing how one little comment can make me just go off of a stranger who I don't even know. It's so funny. I was watching an interview with Eddie Murphy, and somebody asked him if he had social media, and he was like, no. He's like, that's crazy. And they're like, why? He's like, that's like letting a stranger in my car as I'm driving down the highway to say the craziest thing at me and then just get out the door and shut the door. Yeah. It's like, man, that is so true. Just all these outside voices. So no, I'm human. Absolutely. There are moments where I'm like, okay, I need to give this person a piece of my mind. But I just go back to knowing who I am, knowing the voices in my life who I care about, who have the bigger voice. To me, somebody said that, success is when the people who know you the most love you the most. And so as long as I come back to my core, my wife, my kids, people around me who truly know who I am and knowing who I am in Christ, those are the two things. If I can just get back to that, which is hard when a hater comes in and says something crazy that is not you, but just coming back to the core people, who actually know me as opposed to a stranger.
How do you decide what is the appropriate time to respond and what type is not? Or do you not? What is your stance on that?
That's interesting, because to be honest, if I lean towards any emotion, it's to not respond at all. There's a guy that said, every night a bunch of dogs bark at the moon, and nobody cares about it. But if one night the moon decided to bark back at the dogs, it'd be on the front page of the paper. So I love that illustration because it just fits more to my DNA, that I usually don't even give somebody the belief that their opinion counts enough
because it would escalate it.
Yeah,
because
but then there are some moments, and I think it's an art form, not a science.
Yeah.
But there are some moments where I feel like, okay, me responding to this in love and with the right words can actually help that person and help somebody that's seeing the attack or what they said with the right words to do it. But there's some things, and again, it would be a scenario by scenario situation, and me just trying to say, okay, I don't know. I think it'd be an art more than a science.
Do you find that the criticism or going through those things, does it ever make you be hesitant in what you put out?
I would say sometimes, yeah, because I think, there's also this belief today in the world and even in Christendom that just because you have a thought, it needs to be put out. I think that's the dumbest thing ever. It's like, oh, you're not being real if you didn't. No, sometimes it's just being gracious. It's being wise. There's some things I think you don't need to say. So I think not necessarily because of criticism, but I am just very pensive and mindful when I put something out as to how it's going to affect somebody else. But I wouldn't say it's not because of criticism, because if you're processing everything out of who's going to hate on you or be a criticism, you'll never say anything, do anything, or be anything. But I do think this notion of whatever comes to your mind, just put it out there and speak is absolutely crazy. I do think you need to think before you post, think before you speak.
Do you find it difficult being in the Christian world as a preacher, communicator? You communicate one thing, people oftentimes hear their own version of what you communicate and have a tendency to project what they heard onto you or expect you to be fit into a certain political category or certain box based upon you saying you said you were a Christian.
Right, yeah.
And if you're a Christian, you surely have to fit into this box or that box.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you deal with that?
It's so funny, man, because you see it all the time. I love it, and either way, sometimes I'll post about something that that I am passionate about, or I'll see somebody else who took a stand on something, because that's just the reality. Social media, it has to keep coming up because it's just our generation, and I'll see somebody post about some issue or something, and I'll see somebody say, "Oh, thank you for taking a stand." Christians don't say anything, and I'm thinking, okay, there are people who don't even have social media accounts who are doing more behind the scenes on that actual issue, and that person just could have posted it and not looked a second, looked at it again. So it's just funny. It's coming back to the core value of who you are, knowing what you're called to do. And that's the thing. And having the grace to know that just because I'm passionate about something doesn't mean you got to be passionate about it. That's the beauty of the human experience, is that somebody can be passionate about something else and still be a believer. And God uniquely gave that person that passion because that is an ill in the world that needs to be fixed. So in the same way that I respect other people that have their passions, I expect mine to be respected too. And when it's not, I can let it roll off my shoulder because I know we were all uniquely given our own passions, and those passions actually point us to our purpose. If there's anything I love to get back to, even in preaching and speaking, is getting people to find what is the thing that you were put on this earth to do. What is there's a reason why that breaks your heart. There's a reason why that gets you excited. I always say that emotions are terrible dictators, but they're great indicators. That you should check your emotions. And why do you feel a certain way about that thing? Because somebody else doesn't feel as passionate about it, even though it's a huge issue in the world. But God might have uniquely given you that passion because He's called you to correct it. And so I operate from that premise. I don't ever really get bothered by somebody saying, "Oh, I thought you should be passionate about that." I was like, no, God's given me a passion in the lane of which I'm doing, and He's giving you one too. Go find it, because it's not just criticizing other people.
Do something with yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
How do you draw the line, though, between being gracious and being limited by the perception or control? Or I'm not going to say this or put this out just because I don't want to have to deal with the backlash of it. I mean, think about just case in point, even with you and your wife on social media at the ending term of the Obamas,
right,
posting a thank you to them, which I think is incredible and awesome.
Right, yeah.
But the backlash that you get from people in that regard specifically, does that make you hesitant in the future to do things like that? Not just standing up against injustice, but
right,
appreciating, heritage and history and what people have done to actually get
right,
us to the place that we're at.
No, because it doesn't make me hesitant, because again, if it's back to the core value of who I am and a conviction. So like for that example, there's plenty of things, just like any president, that there are policies I didn't agree with and policies I did agree with.
Yeah.
But I do know to sit in that seat
Yeah.
as the president of these United States of America
Right.
for 2 terms is a huge responsibility,
Yeah.
is a huge weight that I don't think any of us have any context for or know what it takes to do it. So for me, I'm always going to honor leadership. And to me, honor is such a huge value that absolutely I'm going to post without fear or hesitancy of what anybody's thinking, because to me, a core value is honor. And then a post like that, I'm not saying I agree with every
Right.
policy President Obama had. I'm saying, no, thank you for your leadership. And I know it was a huge sacrifice, sleepless nights that it took for you to lead this nation, and any president, and I would, do it again. So I think, if I go, to answer the question, I don't think I have any hesitancy when I know it's a core value.
Yeah. It comes from an internal place.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not bandwagony or I should do this because it's what I should do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got to be a core value for me. And if I can sleep at night and say, hey, at the end of the day, this is a core value and principle that I have, then I'll deal with whatever somebody might say.
What are your thoughts on, I think it's kind of trendy and highly encouraged, people who have influence, platforms through social media or in the world. There's a lot being said about using those platforms that may be, you have somebody that has a platform because they're a comedian, or somebody that has a platform because they're an actor or a leader or a politician or a preacher. Then you also have the pressure, which comes in the form of it's your responsibility, if you have those platforms, to use them to stand up, to fight against things like injustice, to give voice to people that don't have voice. Where do you stand as far as your personal, opinion, convictions about that, about using your platform for those kinds of things that cross outside of the confinements or the boundaries of your trade?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's a hard one for me. In fact, one of the things that comes to mind, in our current context, is I was literally just watching this today. They were attacking the Dallas Cowboys quarterback Dak Prescott because he personally believed that, the NFL is not a place to bring, or the anthem rather, is not a place to, bring the protests of social justice issues and different things like that. And he's just being attacked like crazy for it. And it's hard. It's hard for me because it's that balance between, I do think anybody that has a platform does need to use your platform, because to whom much is given, much is required. So you do need to use your platform to speak against things. But at the same time, I just think that we have to be so careful as a society to start throwing attacks towards people when you don't know the behind the scenes conversations. You don't know what it even takes for that person to have that platform. So I just always really err towards the side of just grace and having grace on that person and say, hey, maybe there's a reason behind the scenes that I don't know why that person is not saying what I think they should say. But I've just always operated from the premise is I don't get to tell somebody, what they should speak on or what they should say and or how they should use their platform, because that's their platform. For me, my platform, at the end of the day, I'm going to be held accountable for the platform I've been given, and I'm not going to be held accountable to other people, but to God. And so I want to steward mine well. But I don't know. It's a slippery slope, I shouldn't say slippery slope. It's just a tension.
It's a tension.
Yeah, that I don't necessarily know if I know the answer.
Where for you are you currently drawing the boundaries? politics, for example, fighting against, whether it be immigration or things like that, that you see children being separated from their parents and things like that.
Gotcha.
A lot of people are being pushed to, if you have a voice, use it.
Absolutely.
Do you choose to engage in those issues?
There's sometimes I do, but to me, I always come back to, okay, what can I do? Not just in a post, not just in a tweet. What can I do practically in my community, in the lane that God has given me? It's easy for me to pick any topic like abortion and say, oh man, we've got to do better, da-da-da-da. Yeah, post about it. But our church has done something that has been absolutely incredible that we've gotten a chance to be a part of. It's called Hope Mansion. Our church purchased a mansion that was foreclosed in our community, renovated it, has like 14 rooms in it, and we actually have a space for young girls in the community who have had children, had babies, and we have an option for them to say, hey, come in this house. We take care of them, take care of their kids, and it becomes a transition place for them to get back on their feet as opposed to just posting something or shouting about something. To me, that's a practical way that our church has said, hey, let's actually do something about it, not just tweet about it, not just hashtag about something. So that's a house, and right now we have like 12 girls in that home right now who are pregnant. Some have babies, and they're there, and they have a place that they can come and find safety and actually have an option. So when their back is against the wall, they don't feel like my only option is to have an abortion. So to me, just action is huge. Take the athlete thing, for instance. There are a lot of people who say, hey man, every athlete should take a knee during the anthem.
Right.
I think that is there. If that's the way you want to do, that's awesome. That's awesome isn't the word, but if that's how they want to bring an awareness to the issue, I think that's their way of using their platform, which I think is good in a sense. But I also love that coupled with a LeBron James, who this week opened up his own school to help disenfranchised students and is actually, taking action. So I think both. We need awareness, we need protest, but we also need action. Yeah. To me, the gospel is action. Just what are you doing? Not just posting. What are you actually doing? That's what I always lean towards. There are times where we do need to raise up our voice, post about it, but there's also times you just need to get your hands dirty and say, okay, what can I do?
It seems to me that awareness, we talk about things becoming cliche or becoming just rhetoric. It seems like awareness is easily becoming the great illusion.
Right, yes.
That because I posted about it, that I'm actually doing something to solve the issue.
So true, yeah.
And whether I think that there's so many things that mirror this. People, a school shooting happens, everybody gets passionate about gun control, and all of those things that I would agree we need to have conversations about. But who is taking personal responsibility to have conversation with your children who are sitting up in their bedroom alone trying to navigate through identity issues in life and just figuring out who they are, which eventually kind of put people in a place to struggle with themselves. I just think that we have to do more than just bring awareness.
Absolutely.
Like it can be the birthplace of change, but if you don't take a next step
100%.
I think so many people are judged based upon, exactly what you're talking about. How much awareness are you bringing? But I think the other question that has to be posed for those that are bringing awareness, how much of that awareness is actually leading to action?
And that's going to be the challenge, I think, of our generation, because it's so trendy. It's so cool to have awareness and to post about it. But I think we've got to move from the awareness to action. Because like I said, there are some people who hadn't posted one thing, who don't have an Instagram account, who are doing way more on that issue behind the scenes when nobody's watching.
The tricky part is that everybody thinks they're doing it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The tricky part is you think because I have an opinion, or because I'm actually actively doing something about it.
Yeah, very true.
To be able to move past that.
Absolutely.
Talking about other things that are kind of prevalent in our society. How do you, being a black man married to a white woman, a biracial couple in a society where racism, continues to rear its head in different ways, whether it be in shootings and things like that, or injustice through, certain scenarios and different things like that. Do you take personal action in regards to maybe not politics, but the specific issue of racism?
Yeah, it's a sad reality in in the United States, and it's so funny because sometimes we think that it's an issue. I think there's two different camps that I see of people who are like, oh, can we get over this? Can we just stop talking about it? But it's just a reality that's happened in this nation that I think that has to be addressed. I think one of the ways, I mean, I'll say this, I think there's a preacher who I won't say, but when I was getting ready to get married to my wife, he was like, hey, I heard you're engaged to a white girl or about to propose to a white girl. I was like, oh yeah, I noticed she is. Yeah, she's white. He's like, man, just want to let you know that you can do it, but it's going to really affect your ministry, man.
Wow.
And this was a preacher that I really looked up to.
Wow.
And he was like, I said it is. He's like, yeah. He's like, I mean, if you want to, you can. He's like, I just want to let you know when you get on stage with your wife who's white, you're really going to make white men mad. You're going to make black women mad. He's like, it's just a reality. And what broke my heart from hearing that from him was not just the statement, but that it was coming from a believer. This was a Christian. So to me, that is the sad reality, is that in the church world, it's so prevalent and so strong. I mean, the world is the world, because to me, racism is a sin. It's like anything else. And people who are saying, I'm ready for racism to go away, well, that's like saying, I'm ready for adultery to go away. I'm ready for it's never going to happen, because sin will be here, and until Jesus comes down, and, it's going to be around. It's going to be around. So just get comfortable with it. Now, there's steps we need to do to change it, especially as it relates to society and laws and the prison system and all kinds of things like that. But that's to me what was really heartbreaking about the situation, that this was a pastor, this was a leader who was telling me that. And to me, especially in the church, that's what I think we have got to do a whole lot better. And Martin Luther King said that the most segregated hour of the day is 12 o'clock in the church. And so that's what I think healing really needs to take place, that if we are really saying that we are a one God, one Savior, one Lord, what are we doing in the church world to make it better? And I think me and my wife, just in living our lives and being married and not really caring what anybody thinks, has been a huge statement, a testament, especially in the South, in Dallas, Texas, where I'm at.
Why do you think that is? I mean, the church supposed to be, built on the message of Christ. You would think that we'd be more active or proactive in policing ourselves and thinking about what we don't think about, which is in a large form about what this podcast is about, getting you, if you don't agree with the things that are said, at least you leave thinking about it.
Right, yeah.
Why do you think the church world struggles with that so much, of all people?
Yeah. Because I think we, in the same way, we just go to our tribes. It's so easy to go back to like what's comfortable for us, and we're tribal people by nature. There's settings in churches where I'm going to be more comfortable because I come from a Pentecostal background, and I think we're always looking for that comfort. And so when we see that in the church world, that's a huge part of it too, is that we just want to be with people that like think like us, that look like us, because it's comfortable. But I don't think God ever called us to be comfortable. That's part of the thing he did when he came down to earth. He was trying to get the church, the establishment that was so comfortable. He flipped some tables and said, hey, this is not right. I've come to disturb your comfort. Right. And so I think that's what it is. We get comfortable in the church world and just love to gravitate towards our own tribes.
What do you think needs to happen? How do we, you talk about outside of the church, it's going to be a reoccurring theme that as long as we're all here on the face of the planet, that we're going to have to continue to toil with. Inside of the church, where we would say, within the context of what we do, I mean, you have a responsibility to sort through it. How do we fix the problem?
I think having conversations with people, I think empathy is huge, putting your feet in the shoes of somebody else. I think trying to be intentional, not tokenism, but being intentional in your church. If you have a community that is diverse, being intentional and engaging that community, and have people in your leadership, not just come to your church, but in your leadership and on your team that are diverse. Yeah. Now, if your community is there, because I've seen some places, like some pastors, in travel, they're like, we got to get more Latinos in the church. We got to get more black people in church. And it's like, well, the population is like 1% in your city. I mean, you can, but it needs to be reflective of the actual city that you're in. So I think Again, being intentional about who you're putting on your staff, who you're putting in your team, conversation that you have. I find that some of the most diverse churches are pastors and leaders who have diverse lives.
Yeah.
It just starts with that. If you have a diverse life, it's amazing how people will gravitate towards a leader whose life is diverse. But if you're always hanging out with the same pastors who look like you and think like you, it's going to be reflective in your church.
So what do those conversations look like, especially with the context of racism, which is the issue or a huge issue?
Right.
Right. Like us sitting here today, me as a white man, you as a black man. What is that conversation even supposed to look like if conversation is the key to tackling some of these?
I think, again, the way you can't put I don't know if you can put okay, this is the format for the conversation for racial reconciliation. It should start like any other conversation with any other person. It should just be organic and wanting to sit where somebody else sits and engage somebody that's totally different than you. I laugh sometimes at the racial reconciliation conversations they have because it's so
contrived, not genuine.
It's not real, and the foot washing ceremonies and all that. It's just
that's odd in general, right?
Absolutely.
Can we not wash each other's feet?
It's as simple as like somebody that's different. You're saying, "Hey, man, let's go to coffee and let's just talk." And if it's amazing how passionate my wife, who is white, will get about situations because being married to me, black, she's seen situations where we've been in a department store and she's been in the store first and they've treated her a certain way. And then I come up and I'm like, hey, I'm her husband. And she sees the sales clerk change. So, because she's in relationship with me, and when she sees it, she's able to call it out. And so I think it's just getting in relationship with somebody that's different than you. That's hard. And that's hard to do. In fact, we were at a marriage conference and somebody was like, oh, what is it like to, be in an interracial relationship? Is it hard? And I said, the reality is marriage is the crazy collision of two totally different worlds and ideologies, period. So if you think that to marry somebody that is the same color as you is going to give you a visa on controversy and conflict, you're crazy. Yeah. My mom is black. My dad is black, but my dad is from Nigeria. He came to the United States of America, met my mom, who is American. They had totally different contexts, totally different cultural backgrounds that caused tension in their relationship with the same color skin. Yeah. Both are black, but came from totally different worlds and had to work through some things, but were committed to love. And to me, that's what it is. If we can get that premise of, which is why marriages are failing today, if we can get to the premise of, I'm committed to you, Nick. Yeah. I'm committed to this relationship. I'm committed to loving you no matter what. And I want to engage you in conversation. It's amazing what we can work through, but it's going to take that. People saying, hey, at the end of the day, I'm committed to you by love and a choice to say I'm for you. Not a contractual relationship, a covenant relationship. A covenant says, I'm with you no matter what. Yeah. And when you do that with somebody that's different than you, it'll be a natural, organic thing that you'll realize, oh man, I have actually a friend who is black, so I have a different viewpoint. Because there's not a black person in America that I know of that can not tell you that they've had some type of occurrence with the police. Yeah. Not a black male that I know. Right. Almost every black male that I know has some situation with an officer where, it got to, my dad taught us, he worked in the fire department, he taught us that when an officer pulls you over, man, yes, sir. He said, no matter what they're saying to you, yes, sir. Keep your hands on the steering wheel. We had to have that conversation because that's a reality in this nation. And when you have somebody in your life that's a different color of skin and you see like, man, I had people when we had a Sunday at our church where we just kind of talked about the whole thing, my pastor and I, and we talked about it. And there were some people like, I had no idea. Yeah. I had no idea it was an issue. And it's because they had never engaged in conversation with anybody different than them. So.
It's interesting too, because sometimes the people that I encounter, I question, it's not even that they have not heard that it's an issue, it's that they don't want to believe that it's an issue. Right. Yeah. Because those are two really opposing thoughts too. Because fundamentally, there's very few people within the context of, the church experience that I'm around that wouldn't say we are about love and acceptance and walking a mile in the other person's shoes.
So good.
Yeah. Until the situation arises or something, runs cross-grain to some, they don't want to identify that, hey, if you're not actively a part of the solution, then perhaps there has to be self-evaluation that you could be part of the problem.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's what hurts for communities of color, is that when somebody tries to say that this is not valid, that this has not actually happened, that is the actual sting in it. There was a person being interviewed, and they were talking about they were gone through like just molestation and all kinds of stuff in their childhood. A lady, and I'll never forget what she said. She said, what was worse than the molestation and the abuse was when I told my mom and she didn't believe it.
Wow.
She said that was worse. And to me, that articulated how many people of color feel in this nation, is that it's happening. But when people are like, oh, come on, that's not an issue. So you brought up a huge thing. Is sometimes it's just getting people to realize that this is an issue, because you cannot change what you won't even admit, is a problem. So I think, that's a great starting point for some people to realize
one thing that I see too, I do think in our culture, the word racist is so, most people view that word itself as disgusting.
Right. Yeah.
So for someone within the context of being a person who has fundamental values of acceptance and love and appreciation for all cultures and people, to even open my mind to fathom or consider that there may be racism in me because I associate it with the word that I see as so disgusting.
Oh yeah, people go to the extremity. It's like a racist. Oh, it's like, okay,
There's
I gotta
no-
have
I'm-
it. Yeah, I don't have a sheet on my head. I'm not burning
That's-
crosses.
that's not me.
Yeah, but like, it's to me, and this is again, if it's open podcast, give me overt racism than the covert racism, like what one person called the lowercase KKK. Like, it's this idea that you don't even realize. I always tell people, here's one good litmus test if you want to check. Can your child marry somebody of a different race?
Yeah.
If you can honestly say you can marry somebody and you don't have an issue in it, if they marry somebody of a different culture, different race, and something in you comes on this side, that's a good check. Because sometimes, racism can be like bad breath. You're the last person to know, that you have it. And that's anything. I've met some black people that's some of the racist people, most racist people I ever met. Like some looks I've gotten being with a white woman from black people. It's like, oh man, how dare you, da 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 da. So it's just something like saying like anything. Sometimes you don't even realize it's there, and sometimes you got God to let you go through some situations and let the Holy Spirit show you, oh, this is in your heart. Hey, don't be offended that it's been exposed. Fix it and correct it.
Yeah. When you talk about overt versus covert, how do you define those? What is the difference?
Covert. It's almost like, especially being black, you can't even put a word. You can sense it. It's it's in me being upgraded to a first class flight, and the Caucasian gentleman, which has happened several times, sitting next to me in first class. So you're a rapper?
Yeah.
So you
wow.
So who do you play for? Like that is the ultimate assumption. So it's just the subtlety of that. It's in our prison systems. It's in the conviction that the sentencing that a young black boy will get versus what a white kid that did the same thing. It's in the news stories and the way it's spun. Troubled teen when it's a white kid in the shooting. Thug when it's
which is very real and very
absolutely.
everyday.
Yeah. So that it's the subtlety, the way stories are spun, the way things are talked about. So to me, that's the covert versus the overt, which is what people will ultimately go to and say, "Oh, that's why I'm not racist." The KKK, the lynching, all that. So
Well, it's interesting too because getting people to see it fundamentally to me is the greatest challenge.
Right. Yeah.
And I think, it's interesting. You talk about. It doesn't matter what race you are, that racism can dwell inside of the heart of any human being despite race, because I think it's one of those things that every seed reproduces after its own kind.
Yeah.
And racism creates more racism. So if you're a white man who hates a black man, eventually because the black man feels threatened by you, he in turn hates the white man. And so we all end up being racist towards each other and have no platform for empathy or conversation or willingness to be able to even evaluate, we still see each other as they're the problem.
Right. Yeah, exactly. 100%. And I think that's the gift of it's, and I honestly believe, again, coming from a Christian context, is that I do believe that the Holy Spirit will give you opportunities for your eyes to be open to see this is an issue. And to me, it's what you do after that. Because sometimes you can't know what you do not know.
Yeah.
Because you haven't walked in the shoes of that person. Beth Moore did a recent article that I thought was absolutely brilliant. And she just talked about some of her struggles in being a woman in ministry. Conversations that she had, statements that were made. Oh, you're pretty. You're prettier than this female speaker. Or, oh, that was a great message for a woman. And different statements, just different subtleties. She had a bunch of different nuances in the article that I had no idea or no context for, because I've never been in a green room as a woman. And she just talked about some of the challenges, some of the statements that made me go, wow, I had no idea that's what you walk through. And now I am very careful with what I say. And every moment I get, if I see any young girl, I just did this at a church a while ago. I was preaching at this conference, and the pastor's daughter was in the room preaching to kids at the conference, and I took a good 8 minutes on stage publicly affirming that girl who was like 17, 16 years old, just saying, you're incredible, you're phenomenal, because we don't have a lot of female, and again, well, we do a lot of female voices, not because they aren't there, but it's because it's kind of a good old boys club, and some of us men need to get out the way and let some of these incredible female voices rise up and preach. But I would have had no idea that that's what you walk through until I read that article and what she said, and I realized what she faced. So sometimes you can't know what you don't know, but once you see it, it's like the gospel. Once you see that, you now have a responsibility for what you've been made aware of.
Well, too, I mean, you talk about her being willing to share that. At some point, she had to become aware, fully aware based upon her experience to be able to give voice to it. When you understand someone's journey, to me, that's where your awareness and passion for the issue has to translate into some sort of action in what you can do, which is more than just barking about racism being an issue.
Right.
I think it comes down to being willing then to be, if you are not actively a part of the solution, then you're not contributing to the solution. You're a part of the problem in a lot of ways. So for me, even as a white male, this is an area I'm extremely passionate about, but I feel a responsibility that I have to talk to other white men about how racism is an issue.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? I can't go talk to a black man and tell him how he needs to adjust his view of the white man.
Exactly.
But I can talk to the white man about how you need to consider your ways and how you're viewing other people's other cultures, other ethnicities, and owning responsibility of that.
Right, exactly. 100%.
I think, because, you talk about, I brought this up one time, actually in a church service with our congregation, but the whole idea of, you talk about the conversation that your parents had to have with you regarding a police officer. If you're a white person who says that you oppose racism, but you have never had a conversation with your children about their role in combating it, if you're not, for example, for me, if I'm not talking with my white kids about racism, and I'm expecting, black parents are going to talk with their kids about the issue, it doesn't get better unless everybody takes active
100%,
active responsibility.
Absolutely. And then, like you said, I love that, because it starts in your house, in your home. Things are learned. Every culture, every family has a culture. Things are picked up. And so I think even just that personal responsibility of me saying, okay, as a parent or as a pastor, in my church, I'm going to do what I can with the sphere of influence. I can't change the whole world. I can't do this or that, but in my sphere of influence, I can do something and find out what it was. I think that's a healthy start. So what you said, admitting there's an issue,
right?
And then everybody going, okay, now that we know that there is, what can I personally do in my sphere of influence that can help better the situation?
You talk about it starting in your home. What is that? What do you think that's going to look like for you in the future with your kids? Your kids are young now.
Yeah.
Will there be conversations?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think one of the things we just start with, telling them even already is that, as in our household, we're loving people. We're looking for the lonely person in the room. And again, mine are 3 or 2, so holler at me when the when I'm further along in the journey. But
Yeah.
I try to just find little moments to shape their worldview. We were watching The Grinch, and my daughter was like, "I hate The Grinch. I don't like him. He's mean." I was like, "Well, is he mean, or did he just need some friends?"
Yeah.
She's like, "No, he's mean." I was like, "No, I think the Grinch just needed some people to be nice to him.
Yeah.
Just some people to give him a hug. Sometimes people aren't just mean. They just need somebody to love them." She's like, "So the Grinch is not bad?" I said, "No."
Yeah.
I said, "He just needs somebody to love him."
Yeah.
So just even little things like that, I'm trying to do what I can in whatever conversation with my daughter. My daughter, again, they're mixed, so her hair naturally froze out. And Taylor, the other day, my wife straightened it out. She straightened it out, and she was like, "Daddy, my hair's so pretty," because she was moving it like that. I said, "Sweetheart, your hair is always pretty.
Yeah.
It's pretty no matter what, whether it's straight or whether it's a fro." And see, that's why there was a white friend. He's like, "What's the big deal about Black Panther? Like, why is everybody making a big deal about it?" I was like, "It's called representation." Because when you're a black kid and all you've seen is a white Superman and a white Batman, and now all of a sudden you see this black superhero that looks just like you, that's a big deal to go, there's somebody that looks like me that's doing something great. Representation is huge. And so even with my daughter, she thinks already at 3 has a context that pretty hair is hair that can shake and move, that comes out. I'm like, no, sweetheart. Whether it's froed out or whether it's straight, your hair is pretty, period.
Yeah.
Like that. So just stuff like that, again, we're early in the journey, but I'm trying to find those moments where I go, okay, this is an opportunity to shape their framework and shape their little eyes to.
It's interesting. You almost don't see. I think even right now, seeing how early on that starts, belittling things that you don't understand or that you don't see. You don't see how early that's programmed from childhood.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's why even what you were saying, it starts in the home. If you're passionate about any type of social injustice and you really want to make a difference, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Start at home.
Right, absolutely. What's that? We even have this in one of the rooms in our house, the Mother Teresa quote that says, "You want to go change the world, go home and love your family."
Wow.
Because we can just start right there. And I think that's why the enemy, not to get super spiritual, but that's why the enemy attacks families and homes and all that, because if it could start there, it's amazing the change that'll take place.
And that's where I even come full circle to what we talked about in the beginning, why empathy and putting yourself in someone else's shoes is so important. Because once you get grown and you're past all of those things, you already think that you know.
No, yeah, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
you say, what's the big deal with exactly what you're saying? What is the big deal? And that's why stopping to listen, having conversation, having empathy, walking in somebody else's shoes is so important.
No, absolutely, man.
Yeah. For you, when you look towards your future, have you been the kind of guy that's always kind of set goals and reach towards them, or are you of the mentality of just kind of doing what's in your hand to do today? What does that look like for you?
I definitely have. I'm more definitely of a short-term goal person. I've never been the guy. It's like, what's your 10-year plan? I'm like, homie, I'm trying to get through the next 10 months, So I'm definitely a short-term person than I am a long-term person. One quote that I've always loved, it says, write your plans in pencil, but write your convictions in pen.
Wow.
And so
You're a quote machine. Have I told you? I don't know how many quote bombs you dropped in this conversation, but it's been a few.
Oh my gosh. But it's so true, man. Plans can change. Me and my wife and I said, we're going to wait 5 years before we have kids. Hello, 3 kids, 3 and under. Later, write your plans in pencil, but write your conviction in pen. Like, this is who I am. This is my core value. But I think some of the plans, they change. But
being someone who's, extremely inspirational, aside from, obviously the Bible and your faith, where do you get a lot of your personal inspiration?
My dad be huge, man. If they ever want to do a Lifetime movie, they should do it on Robert Madu Sr. Just from his journey of being one of 7 brothers who are all still in Nigeria, his step of faith to fill out an application to come to Union University in Tennessee, and just getting favored to get a visa to come to the United States, to get married, to just the faithfulness And the loyalty and the stick-to-itiveness of that man is like nobody I've ever seen. If you ever see me quitting or throwing in the towel, don't believe it, because I'm convicted by the life of my dad, of how faithful he's been. Married to my mom 35 years, just retired from the city of Dallas as a fireman for 32 years. Just the most faithful, consistent man. Never pastored a church, but pastored his family.
Wow.
Made sure we were in the house of God. Never saw any contradiction. My mom and my dad, but especially my dad being a man and having kids now, never saw anything contradictory from what he was telling us to do to how he was living. It came full circle, man. At his retirement, he just retired from the fire department. And the fire department is interested in any other job because you live with the guys that you work with.
Yeah.
You're there 24 hours. You spend the night. So if you got any skeletons, somebody on the shift is going to see it because you sleep with those guys. And to see all these guys from different stations, my dad's been to like 4 different stations, come out of the woodworks at my dad's retirement party. All them stories of, man, Robert prayed for me when I went through this. Man, I was down and needed some money. He helped. All of them. I was just there weeping like a little girl, man, because it was just like, man, my dad has never been anything different in private than what I've seen in public. So my dad's a huge.
Those are the real heroes, right?
Right, yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
the ones that live these cinematic lives and you never see their face on the big screen.
Absolutely, yeah. I say number one, my dad for sure would be a huge inspiration.
If you could go back and, the success that you've had at this point, if you could rewind before it all started and give yourself some word of advice, what do you think you'd say to your younger self?
My younger self is, I would say, relax.
Yeah.
It's not that serious. Because it's so, how your strength is your weakness,
Yeah.
And so I think I definitely lean towards the perfectionist side. I mean, I cannot tell you, when I was talking about the grind earlier, I cannot tell you in the early days the time I would put into studying and make sure I had the right word and all that. Even these settings, to be completely honest with you, are not my absolute favorite.
Really?
Because it's so out of control.
Yeah.
And
you don't know where it's going to go.
I don't know where it's going to go. I won't listen to this podcast. And I'll be like, why did you answer that like that? You could have been way more articulate.
Did you just say you won't listen to this podcast? Thanks for that, Robert Madu.
I'll listen to your part, not mine.
I won't listen to this podcast, but good luck with that.
Sometimes I won't go back and listen to sermons. Like I have to force myself, because that perfectionism thing is huge. And again, it's an asset, because in terms of like crafting and honing my gift and being a great steward of what I feel like God's given me to do, I feel like it's helped in that sense. But if I'm not careful, it can go towards performance, to think that my acceptance is based off of how I perform with people or with God. And so that's what I go tell my earlier. I've gotten better than I was when I first started. So that's what I would tell my younger self, is like, chill, Robert.
Yeah.
It's not that serious.
The idea of your strength being your weakness, you think that applies to everybody?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all have certain gifts, certain measures that, if channeled the wrong way, it's all stewardship, man. If channeled the wrong way, can be detrimental. And that's the thing that trips me out about God, if I'm honest, is that when you really think about that scripture that says the gifts of God are without repentance, that God gives you a gift.
Yeah.
And it's up to you whether you want to use it for his glory or not. And you see people in culture who are some of the most gifted people that this world has ever seen, and their gift became their downfall. It was actually what killed them, because it wasn't stewarded right and because it wasn't given back to him. And that just trips me out. It shows me his grace, that he's just kind enough to give you a gift, whether you want to use it for him or not. But it's also, to me, a very scary thing to know that if what the gift I've been given that will ultimately bring glory to him and help so many people, that if it is not stewarded right, can ultimately be my downfall, my detriment.
When you talk about a gift, how do you define the difference between a gift and a talent? Do you separate the two?
No, I would say I probably use those terms interchangeable.
Do you think, is a gift your skill, or is that separate?
I would say it's both.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think there's just a natural gifting that humans have been given. There's also, just 10,000 hours you can put you can put in towards it. If you do something long enough, you're going to be amazing in it. But I would think, yeah, it's that X factor that, for whatever reason, God just said, "Here you go. You can do what you want with it." It's amazing how far some people can go, even with the gift.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I use the terms interchangeably between skill and gift. But I think it's the thing that is just God has just given
It's
you.
what works.
Just yeah. And the place that when you do it, you go, man, I was put on the earth to do this right here.
Yeah.
And some people don't even find it. Some people are, I think, very successful in some fields, but aren't necessarily in their gifting.
It's good. Well, we'll wrap it up with this, and I think I do know the answer to this question, but do you think the Cowboys will go to the Super Bowl this year?
Goodness, I'm gonna say by faith, yes,
okay.
That will be
we'll
in
see
there.
How strong your faith is. Love you, brother. Thanks so much.
I do know this. I have to
today.
say, I do have to add this
What?
just as a closing thought, because I
Okay.
just found out this man is a Steelers fan.
Me?
And let's just
What are you gonna say?
think biblically. And let's just think theologically that when the wise men were trying to find Jesus, the symbol was a star.
They followed the star. They did.
And then when we get the mission statement of the enemy, he comes to what?
Go away. This podcast, this
kill,
episode is
and
over.
destroy.
We'll wrap it
He's
up
a
there.
Steeler. I'm just saying, star or a Steeler.
Oh my
Just
gosh.
as a matter of your salvation,
Thanks
who you
for
want to cheer for.
that. You can just ignore the last 30 seconds.
Oh man,
Love you, brother.
Man,
Thank
love
you.
you, man. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.